So welcome to Hampden-Hampshire Conservation District's Winter Workshop Series on native plants. Tonight's talk is by Heidi Dollard. Heidi is the co-chair of the steering committee of the Massachusetts Pollinator Network. She works to educate gardeners and homeowners on how they can support pollinators and other beneficial wildlife while creating a beautiful and low-maintenance landscape. Heidi has a master's of science in biology and is a master gardener. She has been an enthusiastic native plant gardener for many years. Heidi was interviewed twice by local news outlets, and her garden was featured on the Fine Gardening blog. Tonight's presentation is titled Transform Your Yard to Habitat, a 12-step program. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you. And I'm delighted to see so many people here tonight. So the purpose of this talk is to get you started on actually doing something in your yard. You're probably already aware that native plants are really important, that we're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis. And in fact, homeowners can really make changes that will make a difference in the environment. But a lot of people just don't know how to get started. So this gives you a step-by-step guide. So I just want to remind you why we really care about insects. I mean, a lot of people really hate insects. They find them scary and disgusting. But in fact, insects are absolutely essential to all life on Earth and very important to people too. 1/3 of our food plants produce fruit or other, edibles because they're pollinated by insects. 80% of flowering plants on Earth are pollinated. They're the basis of the food chain. They're the way that many, many small and even larger animals get nutrition that are from plants into bodies. So this is the way calories are basically passed up the food chain. And they provide numerous other ecological services, including seed dispersal, decomposition, soil aeration, and things that we're just learning about. So as I said, they are essential for life on Earth. This is one example of, or one illustration of how much trouble we're in. Lepidoptera are moths and butterflies, and you can see since 1970, and this just goes up to 2010, these lines are continuing to go downward. This is 15 years later. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. Lepidoptera, the moths and butterflies are declining. All other invertebrates are declining at an even more rapid rate. So we have to start doing things differently. Just want to give you a reminder on what pollination is all about. Plants are rooted in place, so they can't wander around and choose a sex partner. They need help. They need help getting the pollen, which is essentially the equivalent of sperm, over to the ovule, which is the equivalent of an egg. Some plants use wind pollination, but most plants, 80% of plants, use an insect intermediary. So no insects, no pollination, no fruit, no seed, no ongoing generation of those plants. Birds really rely on insects as their food. A lot of people think of birds as eating seeds and berries. They put out bird seed in their feeders, and you see a lot of adults eating bird seed. But almost all baby birds need caterpillars. They can't eat seeds and berries at all. A few species can, but most of them require a caterpillar. It's like this concentrated package of protein and fat that is essential for them to grow. It's soft, it won't abrade their insides. And those caterpillars eat native plants. Very few caterpillars can eat our non-native ornamental plants, or even worse, the non-native invasive plants that are now taking over our landscape. So it's really important. If we want birds, we have to plant native plants for caterpillars so the birds can feed the next generation. And the studies show, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail later, that a landscape needs 70% native plant biomass to enable, for example, a Carolina chickadee to raise a nest of chicks. Okay, so what is a native plant? It's important to understand that if you're going to go out and get some. That is a straight species, not a cultivar. If you go to most garden centers, most of the plants you see are a result of human intervention, human breeding plants. Even plants that had a native parent often have been bred to have, you know, double blooms, special flower colors, maybe a lower growing habitat, bushier. Those plants that have been messed with by people might be as useful as the straight species, but many of them are not. And it's very hard to tell the difference just looking at a plant in the garden center. So I really, really encourage people when they're going after their 70%, use straight species, not a cultivar or a cultivar out of a native, which is often referred to as a nativar. And you'll see a lot of garden centers pushing nativars as the equivalent of a native plant, and they're not. Excuse me. So when we say a native plant, it has to be somewhat part of our ecosystem. Some people take a very narrow definition. If it wasn't growing right here in Hampshire County or right in my neighborhood, well, then I shouldn't be planting it. We take a broader view and we say that if a plant grows pretty much in the vicinity, and we say the vicinity could be, as far away as like the Rockies or the Mississippi River, or as far south as Florida. That's because we feel that those plants can provide nutrition and for insects that live in our area, that it's, there's an overlap, that there are species in our area that can use that plant. So here's step one. Before you even go outside, before you put your shovel in the dirt, first thing you have to do is just swear off pesticides, herbicides, and artificial fertilizer. All of those chemicals are very harmful to insects, birds, mammals, and microbial life, which is, the life of your soil, both directly and indirectly. And a lot of broad spectrum organic products that you may think are okay are not okay. Maybe they've been labeled organic because they're less harmful to people. It doesn't mean that they're not less harmful to insects. Now, of course, there are situations where you have to use some sort of a pesticide, which includes herbicide. But in that case, it's important to use as little as possible of something that's very targeted to the pests that you need to control. Step two, lighting. This is really essential. Those lights that you may have on at night screw up all the wildlife out there. The birds, it confuses the birds, it confuses the insects, but it's a really, really simple fix. So if you have, if you just keep the lights off except when you need them, if you have motion activated lights, or if you use those yellow LEDs, the yellow lights are not nearly as attractive to insects. You know, people of my age remember when you went out onto the porch at night, the light was just surrounded by a cloud of moths and other insects, and there was like a you know, a patch of dead insects on the floor underneath the lamp. And that was because those lights kill all those insects. They get attracted to the light, and then they get eaten by something else, or they forget to eat and forget to reproduce, and that's the end of them. So it's really, really important to monitor and manage your lights. And, even when they're on, they should be pointed down. So step 3, really take note of what you have. Before you go looking for plants, before you do anything, understand what's out in your environment. What is your soil like? Do a pH test. You can do a soil test at UMass. Is your soil heavy? Is it sandy? Is it clay? Is it got a lot of um, um, fiber and organic matter in it? Where is sunny? Where is shady? You can make a map. Understand where your leach field is, or underground pipes. You don't want to be planting any woody plants near either your leach field or your pipes, and nor do you want to plant a tree under your overhead wires. So you should also understand the plants that you already have in your landscape. Um, you may not be able to identify every plant, but you should be able to figure out at least what the big ones are, or the numerous ones are, and certainly the invasive ones. And I'll get to that in a minute. But if you have some non-native plants that are scraggly, or you never really liked them, ditch them, get rid of them. On the other hand, if you have some really valuable native plants, you want to know what those are so that you can protect them. So also take stock of what you can really accomplish. How much time and energy and money do you have? I really don't want to encourage people to get too ambitious, get in over their head, and then have things not turn out well. It's important that your yard looks good. And so I always encourage people to start small and then build on that over the years. Oops. So if you don't know what your plants are already, and a lot of people, I would say even most people probably don't know what a lot of the plants are in their yard, I recommend using one of these smartphone apps. My favorite one is iNaturalist, and it's free, and you can post the picture to their database, and then an expert will confirm or correct your identification. And then it goes into their database, and it can be used for citizen science, which is very nice. Oops. Okay, invasive plants. Invasive plants are an enormous problem in our landscape now. And every year they're taking over more and more real estate. And these plants do not feed our native insects. They do not provide food for our native birds. They're displacing native plants sometimes, and they're even killing plants. When you drive down the highway and you see the bittersweet that absolutely covers miles and miles and miles of trees on the median, those trees are doomed. And trees are really, really, really important to our ecosystem. So, this is a train wreck that we're facing right now. And I think it's kind of snuck up on people. People don't realize that their yard may be taken over. Their yard may even be dominated by native plants. You got to get rid of them. They're not going to help the environment, and it, it, they're not going to feed anything. So, and they're just growing more and more and more. They're increasing rapidly every year. It's really scary. Um, so you can use those apps to identify the plants. Maine has an excellent guide. You can download a PDF, you can send away for the book. A lot of the extension services have really good guides. I like the Maine book because it has good pictures, but some of our invasive plants are not in the Maine book, so just be aware of that. Okay, after you've gotten rid of all those invasives, which might take a while and you might have to do it over and over again, sit down and really analyze your situation. First question is, do you need any hardscaping or regrading? That should be done before any further planting takes place. Any kind of, heavy equipment work or even heavy shovel work will disrupt your plants. And so it's just a waste of time and money to plant anything until, like, do you need a new driveway? Do you need a new walkway? Do you need something regraded? Is there water going in your basement? You have to change the flow of water in your backyard. And then ask yourself, where are my areas of opportunity? Where could I add native plants to my landscape? And the biggest opportunity is the lawn. And I'm going to go into more detail about this. So lawn is just an ecological wasteland. Very, very little can live in lawn. It's just, it's not native. Our turf grasses are all from Europe and Asia. There are some insects, especially Japanese beetles. They love lawns. So if you have a Japanese beetle problem, that's another reason to reduce your lawn. But it does not support our native flora and fauna at all. And it has many other detriments to our environment. I actually give a whole talk on this, on how bad lawns are and how you can make them better or replace them. So really ask yourself, what piece of the lawn are you really using? And most people need some lawn. You may need, you have kids, you have grandkids, you have dogs, you want to play badminton in the backyard. Sure, all that needs lawn. And they're very good for walking paths too. And it is important to maintain um, a method of getting around your property. So I encourage you to use lawns as paths instead of as wall-to-wall carpeting. Other areas of opportunity, if you want to add, people look at their property and say, I have 3 acres. I want to put it in a garden. Where should it go? The answer is it should go under your native trees. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But if you've removed some invasives, or some other plant you didn't like, replace it with a native plant. And you can add native flowers to existing perennial beds as well. But if you have slopes, you're not doing anything on a slope. You can't have a tea party. You can't play basketball, football there. That's where you should be looking to plant some native plants. And as I said, look at this. Look at all that lawn. That could be habitat. But what is it? It might as well be asphalt. Here, I'll put this person. So create garden. This would be if you didn't have any other place you wanted a garden. You're just looking at your yard. Maybe this is your house. Look at all that lawn. You can't replace all of it at once. where should you start? Check to see which of these are native trees, and then you can plant under the drip line. So this, can you see my pointer? Maybe not. The tips of the tree, if you draw a line from the tips of the twigs down to the ground, that's the drip line. So if a leaf fell from a twig to the ground without any wind, it would land in the garden, and that's what you want. You want to create this soft landing environment so that all the zillions and zillions of insects that are living in the leaves of your trees and are going to be looking for a place to overwinter, they can fall to the ground. Most of them overwinter either in the leaves or underneath the leaves. They need soft ground. That's where they are in the winter. And if you don't provide a place for insects to go in the winter, no insects in the spring. So that's a huge, huge source of mortality for our insects because they're carted off to the dump when they could just stay in your yard and be feeding the birds in the spring. So that's a good place to start, is creating gardens under existing trees. You do have some remaining lawn, and I mean, it's a rare person who doesn't need at least some lawn. Make that remaining lawn as pollinator friendly as possible. So mow less frequently, not any more than every 2 weeks. Set your mower higher. Introduce and or allow low growing flowers. In this picture, there's dandelions, which are non-native, and violets, which mostly are native. They're not all native. Other good low growing walkable plants that can be mixed into your garden is self-heal, which is a little purple flower. Thyme is really good in very dry environments, and clover. You can even get a mini clover that is not supposed to grow higher than 4 inches. And even converting to a low grow, low maintenance grass mix is much more beneficial to the environment. But having all these flowering plants mixed in is really important too. Okay. I do a whole talk about design guidelines, so I'm going to kind of whiz through this, but this is kind of important. First design guideline is going back to the investigations that you did on your property, where you understood the moisture, the light, the pH, the texture of the soil. You're going to choose plants that will be happy in those conditions. You don't want to fight the site, as they say. Just get plants that are adapted to those conditions. They will be happy and they will thrive, and you will be happy because they will be thriving. Again, 70% native plants, straight species, not cultivars. The other 30% of your plants, they could be peonies and hybrid tea roses and lilacs and anything else that, that speaks to you, that, you remember from your childhood. That's fine. You just make sure there's that 70%. And remember, it's biomass. It's not individual plants. So if you can plant some really big trees and bushes, and then you have some little, like, peonies or other non-native plants that are small, you'll easily get to your 70% native plants. Host plants are plants that both house and feed insects in their early life stages. So this is, for example, milkweed is a host plant for monarchs, because monarch caterpillars can only eat plants in the milkweed genus. So they live on the plant and they eat the plant until they form a cocoon and mature into a butterfly. So those host plants, those are really the ones that feed the caterpillars, and the caterpillars are the ones that feed the birds. So host plants are super important. A lot of early pollinator gardens included the non-native butterfly bush, because this butterfly bush, you've probably seen it around. It is very attractive to butterflies, and people think, oh, that's good. We're getting, we're attracting a lot of butterflies. Well, it's good that you're feeding the adults, but it doesn't provide anything for the caterpillars to eat. So in some ways, you can think of it as kind of like an ecological trap. It's bringing the adults in, but then what are the babies going to eat? They can't even lay eggs on it. So it's really not such a good thing. You really, really need host plants. Also, if you have a large property, you could research and include some plants for some at-risk species, which would be a very good thing. Some species that are at risk of extinction. Ideally, you want blooms from the very, very early spring right through frost, so that all the insects that are come out early or stay late will have something to eat, because all these myriad insects have very different life cycles. Some of them are only adults for a couple of weeks. And if there's no food out there for them when they're an adult, then again, that's the end of that that species in your yard. So you also want multiple layers. Ground level, shrub level, and trees. That provides a very complex environment, more diversity, more species, more biodiversity, and also provides much, much, much more biomass than just a ground layer, like a lawn, a ground cover, or even a meadow. Those multiple layers really provide a lot more biomass. It's a really good idea to plant plants in big sweeps or clusters, and for several different reasons. One, it really helps foraging bees. When a bee hones in on one flower type, it likes to stick with that flower type for its whole feeding foray. When, the whole time it's out shopping for food and getting food to bring back to its nest. So if there's a whole bunch of that one flower together, it's much more efficient for the bee. If the bee has to fly like 10 feet between flowers, it's using up a lot of her stored energy, and it's going to be more stressful for her. So helping the bees by making a short hop between flowers is really important. I also say visually, it really, really works for a lot of native plants. A lot of native plants do not have big showy flowers, but if you cluster a lot of them together, the effect can be really stunning. It can be really amplify the beauty of what would otherwise be very modest flowers. And also the textures. A lot of native plants, you really notice the texture when you see a big sweep of them, texture of their leaves. So another design principle is have things very sort of neat and civilized near your walkways, your patio, near the front door, where humans are walking or passing by in fairly close proximity. And as you leave those high traffic areas, things can get wilder and looser. So if you really want to plant, your peonies and roses and things like that, to appreciate them best, those should be sort of in the civilized zone, so that they can have, you can bend down and sniff them and think of your grandmother when you see the peony, rather than putting them out where, you need binoculars to see them. Another really important design feature is what the Xerces Society calls cues to care. So this is basically edges. You need sharply defined edges. The edges could be from hardscape, like a walkway, or it could just be a neatly mown path, as in this picture, or it could be neatly trimmed hedges. But those kinds of edges say to the world, this is a garden. This landscape is welcoming and safe for humans. And that really, really makes a big difference in how your neighbors are going to see your property, which is really important because as you're planting native plants, you're probably something of a pioneer and you want to demonstrate to your neighbors that native plants can be beautiful. So you want your property to be very welcoming, and those cues to care as the key. So also remember that, a lot of times, especially in the winter, you mostly see your yard from your windows. So make sure that you have nice, you've planted some nice stuff that you can see from windows, like, the window over the sink while you're doing dishes. You can also put up signs. That's really helpful, saying, this this is a native meadow to support wildlife. You can get all those signs online. Um, there's a lot of great ideas of plant lists. Northampton has a pollinator pathway. I think this is still an active link. A number of years ago, the Massachusetts Pollinator Network got a big grant, and we had these kits for sale. We don't anymore, but you could easily put those kits together yourself from some of the local nurseries. So now that you have all this information, you can actually develop an action plan. And as I said, you really, really want to plan for the long term. If you have a huge amount of time and money, go for it. But you're an unusual person. Most people are doing the work themselves, they're on a budget. So you need to kind of, pick pick a project to start with. You can come up with a plan so that every year you'll add native plants, you'll add additional garden space, but do what you can maintain, what you can really make a success. You also really want to be low maintenance. And the key to low maintenance is planting a lot of trees and bushes, because once they're established, they require very, very little care. You may want to prune them once a year, but they're a lot less maintenance than, a flower border, say, or even than a meadow. A meadow you have to really patrol a meadow to make sure it isn't taken over by some aggressive, either native or non-native plant that you don't want there. So, then as I said, mow the remaining grass less and plan for paths and edges, not expanses of grass. So once you've chosen your site, you can prepare it. I'm a big proponent of smothering the existing vegetation, be it weeds or grass, with heavy-duty cardboard. And you can read online about how to do this. You have to cut the vegetation very short. You have to get the site very wet, put lots of layers, get them very wet. And then you can cover the whole thing with wood chips. And you can let that, it's a good idea to let it go a year if you can. But a lot of people just then they just let it go a few months and then they just plant right through the wood chips, and they have good success. It's especially good if you are planting trees and bushes, that they'll thrive in that environment. You still have to be patrolling for invasives because they're so tough. And there's always going to be invasive seeds in the soil, in the seed bank. You do not have to do much to improve the soil. Most natives actually do better in lean soil. So don't spend time and money hauling in compost, maybe if you have truly, truly terrible soil. But honestly, Choose plants that are going to be happy in that terrible soil. Then they will outcompete all the non-native weeds and invasives, and you'll have a much better luck. So again, choose plants that will thrive in your situation. So where are you going to get plants? That can be a challenge. However, we are fortunate here in the Pioneer Valley. There are some reliable nurseries. The key thing, whatever plant you buy, whether native, non-native, cultivar, whatever, make sure it was not grown with neonics or neonicotinoids. That is a class of pesticides that are commonly used in greenhouse growing situations that are incredibly toxic and long lasting in the soil to insects. Not only does it last several years in the soil, but it is taken up. It's a systemic pesticide that the plant absorbs through their roots, and it goes all through the plant. It's in the leaves, it's in the seeds, it's in the pollen. And even if it doesn't kill an insect outright that's feeding on that plant, it may result in some sort of sublethal effects, like the insect loses the ability to navigate or fly straight, or it can't reproduce. So that is, they recently did a very exhaustive meta-analysis of many large data sets and concluded that neonics are the single biggest cause of the insect decline that we are seeing. Remember that chart that I showed you earlier? Neonics used in agricultural situations. So you want your yard to be a refuge for all the insects that cannot live in farm fields or wherever. So you gotta just really make sure that your plants are totally clean. And you can ask. Most places will be pretty honest with you. And if they don't know, if they say, I can't tell you for sure, don't buy the plant. If you go to a native plant nursery, you can be sure that there are no neonics. So around here we have, my top choice would be Wing and a Prayer in Cummington, but there's also Nasami Farm, which is excellent, in Hatfield, or wait, can't remember if it's Hatfield or Whately. In fact, I hope Megan will send out my resource list, and it lists a whole bunch of nurseries. There's more out in the Berkshires, and also in Hadley, the Gardener's Supply has a lot of native plants, straight species, and I've spoken to them on numerous occasions, and they are making a genuine, true effort to not stock any plants that have neonics. But if you ask the manager on duty, she or he will tell you the ones that they're sure are free of neonics and which ones they're not sure. So there's those reliable nurseries. You can also grow plants yourself. And I encourage you to research online, to Google winter sowing. That's where you plant plants actually in the middle of winter, or even sometimes the early spring. There's a lot of instructions, or if you look up, well, just Google winter sowing, and there's extensive instructions. I do that myself, and it is by far the most economical way to get a lot of plants. Of course, they start small. It takes a while for them to get bigger. You can also plant seed mixes, but there is no point in planting seeds unless you have completely eradicated the seed bank in where you're planting them. And that can be very tough. You might have to solarize the soil with black plastic or with clear plastic, and it's not that easy to do. And you will have a lot of plastic on your hands when you're done. So yeah, that can be somewhat problematic. But you really do have to clear out that seed bank or your seeds won't make it. You'll just get weeds. Now, plugs, that's what's illustrated in the picture here, are a way of buying plants less expensively. They're very small plants. They're generally less than a year old. They generally sell instead of for like 10 to 20 bucks, an individual plant could be like 250 to $4 a plant. And if you plant it well and take care of it, it will probably outstrip the larger plants in a few years and be very healthy. They do take a little more TLC though, because they're so small. So those are often available from native plant nurseries, and a lot are available mail order from, there's a relatively new called Isel, a mail order nursery that sells plugs, and also from a place called Prairie Moon Nursery. And all this will be in the resource document. And again, 70% straight species. If you're planting cultivars, they're part of your 30%. And then you can plant. So use good planting practices, dig a good hole, loosen the roots, plant them so that the roots are right at the soil line, not too deep, not too high, keep them well watered. And then especially around here, I just have legions of rabbits that chew my plants. Yeah, I use an awful lot of this uh, hardware cloth. So at least to let them get big enough so that a little noshing from the bunnies won't kill them. Now here's a very important point. This is what a famous landscape designer from the Hamptons on Long Island calls zero carbon removal. So translated into English, that means keep all the dead plants on your property. Do not send them to the dump. Why do we do this? There's many reasons why it's really important to just keep your dead stuff. As I mentioned before, the leaves are where all those many insects want to overwinter. If you rake them up, if you chop them up, even if you pile them up deep enough, you're killing all those insects that you were feeding with your nectar and pollen and host plants. If they can't make it to the spring, then all your efforts are for naught. So you have to provide winter habitat, and that means leaves. Now, I know you don't want to leave leaves on your lawn. That's why you have to reduce the lawn so that the leaves that are on the lawn can just be brushed into the garden areas, and it won't be too deep a pile. And it won't be too much work either. So yeah, you can't blow them, you can't chop them. I mean, you can some, but at least if a goodly number, and ideally a majority of them, are just left to stay where they fall, that is insect habitat heaven. Leaving the stalks, you know, how we always, when we were good horticulturists, we got out there in September and we put the garden to bed. You know, we cut down all the stalks and we raked out all the leaves. No. That is just a waste of time because many bees overwinter, or they lay eggs that overwinter in those hollow stalks. So you need to leave the stalk standing. If you absolutely can't stand it, you could cut some and then just kind of pile them up in an out-of-way place without chopping them any further and just leaving them whole. Don't put them in the compost. And some of those stalks need to be out there for a full year before the insects hatch and move on to their next life stages. But the seed heads are very beautiful. They've become something of, a big design feature with a lot of the new naturalist garden styles. And this picture here is from one of Pete Udolph's gardens. He's very famous. You may have heard of him. He designed the High Line in New York City and the Lurie Garden in Chicago. He's probably the foremost garden designer in the world now. And he says when he chooses a plant, when he assesses it for how worthy it is for his designs, he includes what it looks like when it's dead, because he wants to leave those dead flower heads. And look at it, that is very dramatic. And it looks lovely in the snow or when there's ice. And it's really cool when you see birds hopping on them, especially the goldfinches really go nuts for those seed heads. And this includes the dead wood from trees, which I know is very controversial. People are very worried about trees falling on them or their house or their car. But really, if you take down the branches and just leave the trunk, it's called a bole or a snag, it could stand there for decades. And here are two examples. I took these, both of these were taken on garden tours. The one on the left is in Newburyport, which, as you know, is a very upscale community. And this was a very upscale garden. And you'll notice that they left a dead tree behind the fence as dramatic sculpture. They certainly had the money and the wherewithal to take it down, but they realized that it was beautiful. And similarly, the picture on the right is a garden in England. I went on a garden tour a couple of years ago, and in England, they are having climate change is wreaking havoc with a lot of their gardens because their climate has changed so much. It's drier and it's hotter, and they're losing plants. And this garden lost all these trees. The trees just died. And the head gardener told me that he's just leaving these trunks as dramatic sculpture, and he thinks it's beautiful. And these trunks harbor so many insects. There are whole ecosystems unto themselves. They feed so many birds that it's really important to keep all that where it can be feeding the wildlife. In addition, all that stuff that you send to the dump gets put in a big heap and it rots in anaerobic conditions, and it releases methane, which is a much, much, much worse gas than CO2 for global warming. So you're doing everybody a favor, including you. Yeah, I know, if you have a small property, you might struggle with where to put it, but you can probably find some out of the way corner. In fact, that's another talk I give about all the cool stuff you can do with your dead wood. So step 12, if you have a landscape, hopefully you are working a little bit on it each year. You're assessing, adjusting, maintaining, planting a garden isn't like rearranging your living room furniture. It's a growing, changing thing. You can't just say, it's set and done. So you have to be interacting with it forever, really. So what's popping up? What is happy? You should kind of go with the plants that are telling you, we like to be here. If something is struggling, well, Maybe it's just got to go. So you'll just edit as you need, as your sense of aesthetics dictates. But going with the plants that work is really the low maintenance option. And then observing what new birds, butterflies, and other wildlife are you seeing. It can be really exciting, and you can use iNaturalist to identify the insects as well as birds. And it's just an ever-evolving adventure. So thank you all. As Megan mentioned, I am a volunteer with the Massachusetts Pollinator Network. So I encourage you to look them up and see what resources they have. I also have a resource sheet that Megan can send to everybody who's registered. I did give you that. I think I gave, well, I can give it to Megan again if she doesn't have it. But thank you all for your attention, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Let's see, I'm going to go scrolling back up through the chat because we did have a few questions pop up as you were talking. The first one is from, well, it's initials. So the question is, my lawn is being taken over by ajuga. Is that okay?
Well, um, there's probably very little you can do about it. So do you hate it? Do you think it's ugly?
You're welcome to turn on your
Yeah.
audio and video and chat at this point.
So here's my take on ajuga. It's not native. Um, I did plant it when I didn't know as much as I know now. I'm not going to pull out what I have. It is very pretty, and it does attract a lot of insects that eat the pollen and nectar. And um, you know, those non-native plants that provide pollen and nectar, they do have some ecological value. It's just that they don't have as much as the host plants do, because they don't feed those early life stages. I think it would be so much work to get rid of the ajuga. So I would just let it go. It's better than lawn grass. Let's put it that way.
It's all relative.
Right.
Okay, so let's see. Which are the low grow, low maintenance grasses? And then attached to that from the same person is, can you recommend plants that are becoming extinct that would grow in our zone? So which are the low grow, low maintenance grasses first?
Well, there's a lot of sources of eco grass, and you can go to the Prairie Moon site, and they have mixes for different growing conditions, but they're not native. I also give a talk on lawns and lawn alternatives, and there are some native plants that are almost a lawn substitute. The most popular one is called Pennsylvania sedge, or Carex pennsylvanica. The downside is, it actually can be mowed, it can be walked on, but it's a clumping grass, so it doesn't provide that kind of smooth carpet-like surface. And none of the native grasses that can be used as lawn replacements. There's some other ones that people are working with now. There's the Cornell Extension has an interesting project. You can Google that. It's they they have a lawn alternative. I actually went to see it, and it was pretty interesting. It's some native grasses with some low growing flowering plants. It doesn't look like a lawn. It's taller than a lawn, but they say it's perfectly walkable. So there's but if you go to these eco lawn sites, like at Prairie Moon, and there's some other ones that, like, that Pearl, I think Pearl something is a eco grass, a low growing or slow growing grass. None of them are native, but the advantage of them is they require so much less inputs than like Kentucky bluegrass, which requires water and fertilizer and constant mowing. So, um, but if you're really using your backyard, like you have kids or dogs or you're playing sports, you just need a European turf grass. There's
Mm.
no there's no alternative to that. There's nothing can take that kind of foot traffic. Does that answer your question?
I think that's the one about the grasses. The next
Right.
one
Oh, and
she
then
asked was, can you recommend plants that are becoming extinct that would grow in our zone?
no, I can't. That's a there. Yeah, no, you wouldn't be able to get your hands on any rare plants because they are they're they're in an undisclosed location. Their location is kept very secret because chances are they need very, very specific, unusual growing
Mm.
conditions or they're fussy in some other way. And like the Native Plant Trust that monitors those rare plants doesn't want anybody messing with them, not
Mm.
even collecting seeds.
Well, and
So,
it seems like the conversation is actually around native plants is the reverse. What are the most at-risk pollinators? What are the most at-risk
right,
insects? And how can
right.
we
And there
support
can
them?
you, if
Yeah.
you are interested in supporting at-risk insects, if you go to, there's a professor at UMass Dartmouth called Rob Jaguar,
Mhm.
Gegear, and he has a spreadsheet of at-risk, I think both bumblebees or maybe all bees and butterflies, and what plants they feed on and use as host plants. And that can be a good guide on plants that you could plant. Remember, if they suit your growing conditions, that you can really boost the ecological value of your property by focusing on those plants.
We're also going to be posting the latest version of that spreadsheet on our website as part of a kit of resources for you guys so that
Great. Yeah,
you can get the updated ones because he does update it periodically
yeah,
as more data comes in. So that'll be you're welcome to. I put it in the chat, his name as well as his location. You can get it yourself now or soon if you misplace the link or forget his name, you'll be able to find it on our website. Thanks, Heidi. So this says, I have a sandy clay soil on 2 acres of potential habitat. Before I plant, I bring in a rich looking black soil from the town transfer station that comes from their brush pile. Can you please comment on using this soil from the town dump?
um, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. So when I was first learning about native plants, I was living in Pelham at the time, and I was on this community garden committee. And we were building a community garden, garden plots for vegetables on an unused piece of pasture land that was full of milkweed, and we felt very badly about it. So about ripping up all this milkweed. So we decided to set aside a chunk of the land for a pollinator garden. So this was my first experience planting a pollinator garden. And similarly, no one else had any experience with this. We were just, we were gardeners. And the first thing a gardener does is if you want good, healthy plants, you bring in compost. And at great expense and a huge amount of work, we brought in a ton of compost and we filled the pollinator garden with this very rich, expensive compost. And we got all these plants, they were donated, and they all grew huge and leggy and flopped over, and the garden looked terrible. And as we're doing this, I had started reading, and I said to one of the other committee members, I was reading that native plants really do better on lean soil. And she said, no, we're going to do this right. And so we brought in this compost, and the garden, it did not look good because everything just, we had, yeah, it was nuts. We had like Joe Pye weed that was 12 feet tall and then just tipped over in the first rain.
So
And
are you saying that they over responded to the nutrients? They just kind of didn't
yeah,
know what to do with the
they're not,
chemistry?
that's
Okay.
not what they're adapted to. And so based based on that experience, so then the next year or the following year, I was able to build my own house. And I wanted to put a little blue stem meadow over the leach field. And the little blue stem really, really, really likes bad soil. And and I told the builders and the excavators, nope, 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 don't put anything, just you know what they put on leach fields. It's like, though it's terrible soil. It has it appears to have no nutrients, and it could be beach sand. It is no organic matter. And I just said, nope, 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 just leave it. And I did plant little blue stem, and the little blue stem is gorgeous and thick, and it doesn't flop over. There is enough space to plant other stuff, and I'm still trying to add flowers. But I really think had I added that good soil back, the topsoil, then other stuff would have outcompeted the little blue stem, and it wouldn't be predominantly a blue stem meadow anymore. So if you have an area that you want to have a vegetable garden, I would say use that good soil for the vegetable garden. You could, if you really think your soil is really terrible, you could put like maybe an inch on on it, but I wouldn't build up the soil too much. And also, depending on how well that soil was composted at the town, it might have a lot of seeds in it. So, you might be bringing in some trouble. You might be, you don't know what's in there. I guess you'll find out.
Yeah, that's been the main complaint that I've heard from our participants from last year who have used the town composting station soil, is that they inherit a ton of weed seeds because the
Yeah,
temperatures don't get hot
right,
enough.
exactly.
That was the
They're
only
not
caution I was going to
composting
mention.
at high temperature.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
Okay, thanks for answering that one. Let's see. We have a recommendation for Doug Tallamy's Bringing Nature Home, which I think
Mhm.
Heidi and I would both echo. Anything by Doug Tallamy. And then also, let's see, are there plants or ways of planting that might be less of a tick habitat for people concerned with Lyme disease? We do get this question with regard to native
Yes.
plant
Yeah,
meadows,
a lot
right?
of people are, and rightly so. I mean, Lyme disease is really bad. You don't want to get Lyme disease. Um, so there was a study by a woman named Suzanne Lerner, who was at UMass, and now she's with USDA. And she did studies of letting a lawn grow longer. And at least in suburban Springfield, a longer lawn had 0 ticks in it. Where you really get ticks is in shrubs, especially in it's called an ecotone, where um, a forest will meet a meadow in that kind of transition area with low growing shrubs. They kind of like vegetation that's sort of the height of between your knee and your thigh, so they can easily jump on you. So, if you have wide paths, like, 4 feet wide, you're not brushing the the foliage as you're walking. And I do recommend wide paths that you can walk side by side with someone else and not be brushing the foliage. You probably won't get ticks. But I also think if you're like, if you have a meadow or if you have a shrubby area, if you're going to be going in there and weeding or doing something, wear good tick protection. What I do is I tuck my pants into my socks, and then I spray my lower pants and my socks with DEET. And if you do that, you won't get ticks. You know, I don't get ticks when I do that. You can also get clothing that are soaked with pyrethrin, and that will actually also kill ticks. You have to be really careful with pyrethrin though, because it's very toxic to cats. So you need to really understand how to protect cats if you have them. But if you buy that clothing, or if you do it yourself, if you really soak your clothes in pyrethrin, then it lasts through many, many washings. So yeah, you just have to be aware and
Right.
take.
Another strategy, right, that I've heard you talk about before, Heidi, is that when people do want a meadow effect, when they do have a lot of lawn that they want to convert, to make the paths through it wide enough so that you have
Right,
some buffer for your body when
right.
you
Yeah,
walk.
4 to 6 feet wide.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good strategy too. You're not going to be
right.
playing in the meadow, but you might want to pass through it safely
Yeah.
and enjoy it.
Well, you do want paths. You want paths all through your landscape,
Mhm.
partially so that you can keep an eye on what's going on. You can easily get around and monitor what's going on your property, but also just visually, those paths make it so much more welcoming to people viewing your property from the outside or visitors. It really says this is a human focused
Mhm.
landscape if those paths. They're beautiful. Paths are really beautiful in the right place. Yeah.
All right. Any thoughts on what I think is robin's plantain? It has an aster-like flower which forms big colonies and takes over large parts of my yard. Also red sorrel.
Hmm. Yeah, though neither one of those are native, as far as I know. Yeah, that plantain can, I think it's really aggressive. Um, yeah, I don't know specifically what to tell you about it. If you really hate it, you could try smothering it with cardboard and cardboard, and then maybe a really thick layer of wood chips.
What are the
But
roots
I
like on
don't.
that? Are
Hmm?
can you just dig it out? Are the roots pretty easy to manage, or are they
Well, if it's a huge
expensive?
area, that would be. See, the
Yeah,
Mhm.
thing about
they
digging,
spread by underground runners, and
yeah,
they're not especially deep, but they do that, and they also I think they self seed as well, so you can find them, so obviously the patch expands, but then I find them all over the place too. And the same is true of the red sorrel. It has this incredible network of runners underground, um, and so uh, I find them both annoying.
Hmm.
well, the beauty of smothering with cardboard is if you disturb the soil, then you're bringing more seeds up into the light zone where they're going to germinate. So, it could take, so one of the techniques that some landscapers and obviously farmers use is that they'll just cultivate over and over and over again until they've brought all the seeds to the surface, and all those seeds have germinated, and then they've killed them again. That is not so great for soil structure. It's not good for the microbial life in your soil. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I would need to see the situation and, what do you want to plant in the place of all these weeds? Do you want to make it a garden, or do you want to replace it with grass? I mean, it's probably a losing battle if you want to replace it with grass.
Yeah, thanks. I think I just wanted to know, I wasn't sure whether either was native. but
I
they
don't,
certainly.
yeah, I don't think either one is native. I'm not sure, well, without seeing it or knowing what the Latin name is, but I have a feeling they're just more of those very aggressive European weeds.
Okay, let's see. Bunnies eat so many of my flowers, liatris, phlox, lobelia. Any ideas of rabbit-resistant flowering plants?
Um, you can, well, um, hmm. Things, things that have hairy leaves or prickly leaves are generally unpalatable to herbivores. But, you know, like I can have the same plant in the front yard that's eaten to the ground and it's untouched in the backyard. It's just individual rabbits seem to have in their individual preferences. So there's nothing that's really herbivore proof. Um, Also things that are kind of scented. Ah, let's see. There are some things that really I don't think a bunny has ever eaten, but I do have most of the stuff that I do plant in cages until it gets big because of
Mm,
the bunny pressure. Um, Pearly Everlasting, that it likes it, it's a beautiful plant. It is a host plant to at least one butterfly. It starts blooming like in early August and it keeps its blooms that they kind of dry on the plant until it's mashed down by the snow. Pearly Everlasting is a great plant, truly outstanding plant. Um, let's see, what else do I have that I don't think bunnies have eaten? Uh, I would have to look up
mhm.
a list. Um,
Okay, let's
yeah,
see. I think that's
sorry.
oh, thanks for taking a stab at it on the fly. Let's see. Do you recommend a particular herbicide for big, bittersweet root ends sticking up from the ground after you cut them from the tree climbing parts?
I do,
I can see what you're describing. I have experienced this so many
right?
times.
Yeah. Well, sad to say, I mean, this is very controversial in the native plant conservation movement. Some people are just absolutely passionate about never using herbicides. And I wish I could be one of those people, but I have a 3.5 acre property that's very little lawn. And so, you know, I'm battling bittersweet and buckthorn and multiflora rose constantly. And the only reasonable way to not even get ahead of it, just to kind of keep it somewhat in check, is to cut it at the soil line and then I dab it with a tiny bit of herbicide. And so the herbicide that I use is in the two commercial names are Brush Tox and Garlon. And I believe the active ingredient is called tripichlor. But I use the tiniest amount that I need to kill the plant. So, you know, like I've been using the same bottle I bought like 7 years ago because even though I go out and battle the invasive several times a year, you know, I probably use, you know, maybe a quarter cup at in one day of cutting and dabbing. Are there more
Anybody have
questions?
I think that's all of them from the chat. If you have other questions, you're welcome to just pipe up now if you'd like to. I do see one comment here. My wife plants marigolds against rabbits and deer, little guardians.
Well, that's, marigolds do have, they have very fragrant foliage, so that could work. Yeah, that's good.
Is
Ajuga.
ajuga any better than grass?
I think it is. It somebody has bunnies that are marigold eaters.
Yeah, as you said, they have personal tastes.
Right, they do. I think ajuga is better than grass. I really do. It's providing nectar and pollen, which grass does not. And grass also harbors is like the perfect environment for Japanese beetles.
Mm.
That's what Japanese beetles love.
And while the native plants really cater to the specialist feeders and provide the nurseries a lot for insects that we want to support, there are, I mean, a lot of the bumblebees are generalists, right? They graze on a lot of different pollen
there's all
sources.
different. There's many different lifestyles among our native bees. Some of them are generalists, some of them are specialists. Some of them have very specific mouth parts that they're will have a very long proboscis, and some of them, just can feed on anything. Yeah, it's just all over the map.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question. Any advice on how to get rid of horsetail equisetum?
Oh, equisetum. Boy, that is a native plant, but I don't it's not a flowering plant, so it probably isn't providing much. And I know it's super aggressive once it gets going. I don't know, maybe cardboard. You could try cardboard and see what that does. But I know it's incredibly tough, and it's got it really has tough runners too. Kind of cool looking though.
Some appreciations to you, Heidi, for the presentation. And also, I would really want to elevate this comment. It says, thanks for approaching this in a kind, non-judgmental way. So many mistakes happen as we learn. Non-native plant shaming is not helpful. And how, right? I mean, I love lots of non-natives for lots of different reasons. And we also find that there are some non-natives out there that are really beneficial to our pollinators. So the question that follows that is, any thoughts on beneficial nematodes? I had Asiatic beetles.
So I think the Asiatic beetles are Japanese beetles, or maybe, well, yeah, you can get nematodes that are targeted. From what I understand, they're a little tough to use. They need to be refrigerated, and then you have to use them immediately, and they don't hang around very long. Expert in this. I don't think you hurt the soil. I think because those Asiatic beetles are non-native, and mostly when there's some biologic weapon, it's very targeted. It's very targeted of the species. So I think what you did was fine. Yeah, but you're right. It does kill a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of collateral damage there. But if you really research how to use it properly, you can minimize that damage.
Thanks for being here. Thank you, Heidi. Awesome session. And we'll see you guys all.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Happy gardening.